All right. Good day, everybody. This is Ryan Eggensperger. How do I switch this around? There it is. Thank you, Chris. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you. Welcome. Bienvenidos. Willkommen. And nice to have you in New York City for today's exciting walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. We are right now in City Hall Park, this beautiful Croton fountain right behind me has been turned off, or else I'd be splashing around in it. But we are in Manhattan. We're going to take a gorgeous walk. Hi, Shannon. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Gorgeous day in New York. I wish you were here. It's 80 degrees out, sunny, and we couldn't have really better weather for walking across. Genuinely, I'm not going to lie. Oops, sorry about that. Tapping the mic. Genuinely, the world's most gorgeous bridge. It is my favorite. It is a classic. It is a beast. It is elegant and yet strong, which I think is, I know what I always strive to be. I don't know about you. But we are going to get to walk across the bridge, see the most incredible views of New York Harbor and the East River and the Statue of Liberty and all those things. Hello, hello, hello. Great. I'm so glad you guys are here. And we'll hang out in the middle of that gorgeous bridge, and I get to tell you the incredible, triumphant, tragic, elegiac, dramatic story of the construction of the bridge, which I teased a little bit if you saw any of the pop-up yesterday that Chris and I did, but one of my favorite stories in the world to tell. And just so you all know, hi Christina, hi Tage, nice to see you. Nikki, everybody, welcome. Yes, and I love it. Please keep commenting. Hi, Diana. Bienvenidos from California. Please keep commenting. Ask me any questions that come up. Just to give you a little update on where I'm at, I used to be a guide. I started out with Chris here when we opened in New York in 2014, and I've been out west for the last couple of years. I met a lovely lady that I've had to spend some time with. I've gotten to spend some time with. I decided I needed to spend some time with. And so I left New York, and so I am just in town for the week to do a little bit of guiding, to hang out with Chris, and to be able to tell some of my favorite stories to you all over the world. And what an honor it is, genuinely. So thank you. Again, keep chatting, and the only thing I'm going to say about money all day is you've taken Sandeman's tours before, you know how it works. I'm going to try, hey Dustin, what's up brother? Good to see you, man. I'm going to try and do my darndest to make you all comfortable, to show you all some great things, to tell you all some great stories, and if at the end you decide that it was worth your time, please feel free to tip me in my PayPal, which is right in the description there, or in a super chat, super sticker, all those things, how they work on YouTube. And if you're watching this on Facebook and would rather watch it on YouTube, we are comfortable with that. Diana says that her great-grandfather worked on the Brooklyn Bridge. Oh my goodness. Diana, what more can you tell me about that? Was he an immigrant? As we'll find out, it was a lot of Italian, Irish, German immigrants, and it was a very dangerous, very harrowing job to go down into the bottom of the river and dig for bedrock at the risk of your health and safety and sometimes your lives. So Diana, whatever else you can tell us about it, that would be great. I found out after a couple of years of guiding that my great-grandfather, something, maybe a couple more greats in there, came into New York through Castle Garden, so pre-Ellis Island, from Bavaria in Germany, and one of his sisters married a Brooklynite, so she would have been here during the building of the bridge, during the gigantic opening party, which I'll tell you about, which we just missed the anniversary of by a couple of days. Opening, not to skip to the end, it was May 25th of 1883. So I like that we are almost exactly doing this tour on the Brooklyn Bridge's 138th birthday. Beautiful, Diana. Oh, I love it. An immigrant from Ireland, and he went back. He made it. Good for you, Diana's great-grandfather. Glad to hear it. All right. But without further fondue, I am at 2:02 in New York City time, so I am going to... Hi, Michelle. Nice to have you. I'm gonna go ahead and start walking towards the bridge. We got a lot of great viewing and talking and hanging out and storytelling to do. So let's get to it. I'm gonna flip around and we will begin. All right. And just as a caveat, this is my first time using this beautiful piece of equipment, which I'm very excited about. On picking up how things work, or if stunning, you please let me know in the chat, and I'll do my best to work on it. So we're starting our tour in City Hall Park in Manhattan. Right in front of us, you are looking at City Hall, which is incredibly small for this gigantic city of 8.5 million people. And that's because when it was built in 1811, when it was finished, this was a much smaller city. This was prior to the consolidation of the 5 boroughs. So in other words, when this city hall was built, New York City was only Manhattan. And to be more specific, we are downtown right now, just north of the financial district. This was the northern edge of town. How do I know that? I know that because the front and the sides of this were built in beautiful marble, as you can see, but for years, until the 1950s, hi Sarah, until the 1950s, the northern side of this building was actually made out of cheap brownstone, because this was so far uptown that nobody, or at least nobody of any import, would be able to see that they had filled in this crappy, it's like when your dad's Pontiac has that one dumpy door that you never got repainted. That was New York's City Hall. Now the reason I'm showing you this is because today's story is a tale of 2 cities, New York and Brooklyn, which were separate cities at the time the bridge was built in the late 19th century. Now there's always been a relationship thank you, Lucas. Bienvenidos. There's always been a relationship between these 2 parts. There's the little Hitchcock cameo on the left. For those of you who are keeping track, there's always been a relationship between Manhattan and Brooklyn. It goes back to when the Lenape, the natives, were living here for 5,000 years. They called this island Mannahatta, which means the island of rolling hills. And across the land there, across the East River, they called it Lenapehoking, which means the land of the Lenape, the land of the people. Now, when the Dutch arrive here in the 1600s, this of course becomes New Amsterdam, and it is just a tiny little shipping port down at the very bottom of the island near what's now Battery Park. And across the river, you have what is called Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a Dutch name, and it means broken land, which is not a reference to my bank account. It is a reference to the hills of Brooklyn Heights, which I think Chris hung out with you on the other day. But if you look across the river, there are these big sloping hills that go right up from the riverbanks. And it looks like the land has been chopped and broken up, so the Dutch called that the broken land. Now, there has always been a relationship, as I said, starting with, in the 1630s, you could take a ferry from New Amsterdam to Brooklyn. And what that meant was there was a Dutch farmer named Cornelius Dirksen, and you would blow a horn. He left a little bugle by the river there. He would come out and he would hop in his little rowboat and he would row you across the river for 3 wampum, which are oyster shells that the natives used to carve into beads and make into currency. So, the original suburb there. Now, the reason that Brooklyn was so important was because famously the soil here on Manhattan is terrible. Hi, Lorraine. Hi, Jenny. Nice to have you. The bedrock of Manhattan, when you go up to Central Park and you see those giant boulders of Manhattan schist, that is the reason that our skyscrapers can be anchored into the ground so well, but it's also the reason it's never been great farmland. Brooklyn, on the other hand, to get into the geology of it, is the dirt that was left after a giant glacier came down from Canada. Like when you're sweeping up, it left this little pile of dirt, and so it has very nice soil for growing. But that doesn't mean that too many people were over there. By 1800, there were still only about 5,000 people in the entirety of Kings County, which is where Brooklyn is. Meantime, Manhattan was growing and growing. It already had over a couple 100,000 people by that point. Now, you just caught a glimpse of the iconic New York Two Tower. It's true, Tage, and that's part of the story about the two cities that I'm going to tell you, which brings us to the Manhattan Municipal building right in front of us here, and some of you may have caught a glimpse of this yesterday. This is often mistaken for City Hall, and in a lot of ways it is very similar to City Hall. It's a civic building, and on the very top, if we can zoom in for a second, we have one of my favorite statues in the city, this golden lady peeking through the leaves right there. Her name is Civic Fame, and Civic Fame is supposed to stand for the heights that we can all reach if we work together. Come on, show me, where are you? Oh, tricky, there you are, hello. You can see that she is a giant 28-foot tall statue, plated with gold and holding in her left hand a crown with 5 points on it. Those 5 points are to represent the 5 boroughs which were created when the Greater New York City consolidation happened in 1898. So you had the city of New York, you had the city of Brooklyn, and then you had a couple of suburbs, Staten Island, Queens, and the Bronx, most of which were pretty rural, lots of farmland out there. Now, let's start talking about the bridge, because there we have it. Sorry, this is very loud. My friend with the hot dog stand here, I'll try and get us across the street there, but catch a glimpse of the New York Tower, those iconic neo-Gothic arches. Sorry, it's so crazy and loud right here for a second, but it's all part of the program, being in New York City. A lot of sights, a lot of sounds, a lot of smells. There we go. Those are our new friends. How you doing, brother?
How are you? Good?
Feeling good. What are we selling today?
Shakira's coming.
What's that?
Shakira, hello. يلا ها. شغل يا عم.
Excellent. What's your name? Say hello to the world.
Hassan.
Hassan. Nice to have you. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Beautiful day.
يلا Shakira.
Hello.
All right. Hola. Hello. All right. Let's all get involved. So, beautiful dancing, Michelle. The musical hot dog stand. All right. So let's talk some turkey here. We have just stepped onto the pedestrian walkway of the Brooklyn Bridge. This is the best, most beautifully designed way to cross a bridge in New York City. It goes right up the middle and raises above the roadway where the cars are driving, so that you can specifically get these incredible views, get some fresh air, and enjoy being out in the middle of the East River. Of course, without getting your clothes wet. So, all right. So, there we go. Beautiful. Thanks, Tage. So, let's talk about where this bridge came from. So, we have a river between these two cities. For years, you have politicians talking about how useful it would be to have a bridge that connected them, how it would improve commerce, how it would improve relations between the cities. At the time, you had ferry boats, and this started out, as I said, with rowboats. It moved on to giant paddle wheel boats with horses on treadmills. And then in 1835, a guy named Robert Fulton, as in Fulton Street, both on this side and on the Brooklyn side, he makes the first commercially successful steam engine, and all of a sudden we have steam ferries and things go crazy. The East River becomes this incredibly busy industrial waterway. You have ferries going back and forth between Brooklyn and Manhattan, and you have the real birth of the American suburb. You have the first commuters who buy a little property up in Brooklyn Heights, and then they hop onto that ferry every morning and head down to the Wall Street area to go to work in Manhattan. Now, the only problem with this is that those ferries are dirty, they are crowded, they send up smoke and smell terrible, and then in the winters, oftentimes the East River would freeze over and ferry service would have to be halted, sometimes for 2 or 3 days at a time, and then inevitably a handful of intrepid, less than intelligent folks would try and walk across the East River and end up falling through the ice and dying pretty much every winter through the 1850s and 1860s. So you have this idea, but at the time it's unthinkable. It's sort of like when we wanted to go to the moon. It was a gigantic, ambitious project to build a bridge. And the reason for that is you would need it to be a suspension bridge. This busy waterway couldn't be blocked off any of the traffic by having the supports for the bridge in the river. You would have to have something that was suspended above the water. And at the time, there was no technology that was anywhere near long enough to bridge this span. Luckily, we have a genius on our hands. The story of the Brooklyn Bridge is the story of one incredible family, and they are the Roebling family. I'm going to introduce you to them, and then we'll get into more detail. At the top, we have the genius, Johann August Roebling. John Augustus Roebling was born in Mulhausen, Germany, and he is sort of a modern-day Da Vinci. He's a Renaissance man. He's a classically trained harpsichord player. He is a philosopher. He studied under Hegel in Berlin. He is an artist, and he is a civil engineer, but he had this gorgeous, sort of very poetic, philosophical vision of what civil engineering could be. It's lovely to read his writings about things like suspension bridges, which float in the air and they connect what nature has torn apart. If you remember that New York City is a chain of islands, it has been the project of many ambitious men, usually over the years, to try and knit those back together with things like bridges. And there is something sort of poetic about that, using your brain, using science to connect people, truthfully, just like we're doing on this live stream a little bit. And so John Augustus Roebling comes over from Germany. He lands in Pennsylvania. He gets a job working for the railroad, and he realizes they're still using hemp rope to do all of their hauling. And he comes up with a very simple, brilliant idea, which is that they should be making rope out of iron wire. So he invents wire rope, and spoiler alert, that is what is going to be used as the suspension cables on the New York and Brooklyn Bridge. So John Roebling is traveling around the country. He's got a factory making wire rope while he gets to get back to his true passion, his artistic passion of designing suspension bridges. He designs one in Pennsylvania, he designs one in Ohio, he designs one that goes over the Niagara Gorge up in upstate New York, and then he sets his sights on the unbuildable bridge. Now, luckily in 1867, they had a particularly bad winter. The river froze up, and all of a sudden the politicians are willing to take pitches about who can build this bridge. As a tour guide, I appreciate that John Roebling had to literally get on a train with the politicians, with the investors, and take them around to his bridges, explain what he had done in the engineering of the one in Pittsburgh, the one in Ohio, the one over the Niagara Gorge. That is the grand finale, and by the time he has finished telling them about that, they say, all right, this is the guy. He must be the one person on the planet who can build the unbuildable bridge. Let's get some money together for him. And so, that is John Roebling. Now, helping him out as his assistant on this is going to be his son, Washington Roebling. Washington is born in the States. He is a brilliant young man. He studies civil engineering at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York, and then he serves in the Union Army during the Civil War, and he actually ends up building bridges for the Army as they are advancing and they have to cross bodies of water. He's building these little temporary bridges for them to New York, and he starts helping his dad out on the bridge. Now, during the war, Washington Roebling had met his general's sister at a dance. Fallen in love within the year they were married. So, we have Washington, the straight-A student son, and we have Emily Roebling. Keep those three in mind. We'll come back to them later. As we're walking onto the bridge, I'm going to take a little gander and show you what we're looking at. That is One Manhattan Square, that gorgeous new skyscraper. Oops, there it is. That blends in with the sky. It's on stealth mode there. And as we look down onto the roadway, you can see that there are cars driving. There are no trucks, though. There's no commercial traffic, and there are no subways on the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, when it finally opened in 1883, this pedestrian walkway was here, but then down beneath us, there were steam trains going back and forth. There were horse-drawn carriages, and it was a toll bridge originally. It was 5 cents to take a horse-drawn carriage across the bridge. It was 1 penny to walk across the bridge by foot, and it was 2 cents to bring your favorite sheep or pig across the Brooklyn Bridge in the 1880s. Nowadays, all of that is free, especially the sheep and pigs. Now, what we're looking at is the New York Tower. Of course, iconic, gorgeous, inspiring. You've seen it a million times, but let me tell you a little bit about, I like it, Alexa. Let me tell you about what it must have been like to see that initially. Now, we are going to look at the Manhattan skyline for a second as we're walking. And the tower of the Brooklyn Bridge are 276 feet tall. Now, there are plenty of buildings that are much taller than that. You can see One World Trade in the back there. You can see New York by Geary, that wild, swervy looking building that looks like it's dancing. Those are all giant skyscrapers, but in the 1880s, the tallest building on this skyline was only 4 feet taller than the towers of the Brooklyn Bridge. 280 feet tall, that was the spire of Trinity Church. And so if you can imagine seeing these towers shooting up out of the East River, was sort of similar to seeing the Great Pyramids. They were this wonder of the world, and the Brooklyn Bridge was, for many years, referred to as the 8th wonder of the world. Now, I am no civil engineer, but I will tell you what I can so we understand how much of an innovation what we're looking at is. The way this place works, what makes it so special is the stiffening trusses. These steel bars that are running across the roadway. Now, what that does is it makes the bridge rigid enough to be able to support the traffic, while flexible enough to let the wind pass right through. It's sort of doing aikido with the wind on the East River. It lets that wind take over instead of taking it on like a sail, the way the other bridges used to do. And at the time the Brooklyn Bridge was built, 1 out of 4 bridges, suspension bridges, that were being in the world, that were being built, would fail. That means the wind would catch, the roadway would start swinging, the cables would whip around, and next thing you know, that bridge would fall into the water below. So, to make this gigantic bridge was truly a feat. All right. Let's get to work on how we build it. You're looking at these 276 feet tall towers made out of granite, which was quarried from an island off the coast of Maine and brought down in schooners. But before that, we have to have the foundations. And what we're going to do is we are going to build something called a caisson. A caisson is a gigantic wooden box. It's 150 feet long, 100 feet deep, 15 feet tall. You have a shipbuilder in Brooklyn build that. You are going to launch it into the river. It's going to sink down and settle on the bottom of the river, and then you are going to pump all of the water out and pump compressed air in, because that is going to be the workspace where people like Diana's great-grandfather are going to be sent down in an airlock elevator. They are going to land on the bottom of the river there, and then in the 90-degree Fahrenheit heat, they are going to work by candlelight, terrible air quality, muddy, disgusting water up to your feet, up to your knees rather, and you are getting paid $2 a day, but you are fresh off the boat from Ellis Island, so a job is a job, and so you go down there, even though as the months go on and they are digging out the bottom of the river, people start getting hurt, getting paralyzed. There's bleeding from noses and ears. People are in terrible condition when they come out of the caisson, because what we now know is called the bends, or decompression sickness. It was coming up and down in a change of pressure too quickly. Body forming a little burn in your bloodstream. Okay, so we have a couple. How are you? James, where are you from?
I'm
Austin, Texas. In New York?
You got it. It's actually our 5th anniversary.
Your anniversary. I would love to tell you some of the story of the bridge. Yeah, excellent. No. So how should I set this up? Walking.
Originally a footbridge, right?
Oh, okay. So, construction in have a G. Unfortunately, is just getting underway in Brooklyn, and one of the ferry boats that he is about to put out of business by building this bridge, lumber at the high. And he did not believe in modern medicine. He believed in some connection is unstable. Yeah.
Then you want to move on.
Okay.
Yeah, we can walk with you.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. Sure. All right. He treats himself with some, which is methodology. He used to take ice cold baths, and Terp gets his. Yeah. Still unstable here. That is not doing so. We will try and keep moving and see if the signal improves as I get further out onto the bridge. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I appreciate it. That looks like that might be better. All right. How are we feeling now? Is that a little better? It's not decompression sickness, but it's a little rough A little rough patch there for us. Okay, excellent. Great, I think we are back. So as I was telling you, excellent. John Roebling is on the pier in Brooklyn just before the caissons are being laid in the ground.
Brother, we're gonna hang out on this pier. Hey man, appreciate y'all.
Great. Guys. Oops. John Augustus tetanus. Tragedy for this man in his late 60s. He's built some of the most incredible structures. He invented wire rope, and a boat running into a pier takes him down. So, rest in power, John Roebling. We're sorry to see you go. But by the time he died, he had already finished the plans for the Brooklyn. His son, Washington, takes over the project as chief engineer. Washington Roebling, 31 years old, scared to death, heartbroken, missing his father, whom he was very close with. But he knows that this job has to get done, not only because there's a lot of money and politicians are counting on him, but because it was his father's masterpiece. And he was devoted. He had watched his father in those last 2 weeks go into seizures, have lockjaw, meet this tragic end, and he swore that he was going to complete his father's masterpiece if it was the last thing he did. Now, Washington is the one who sends these immigrants, workers down into the bottom of the river to dig out the bottom of the river, and they go down there. They are chunking out the mud, the fossils, the dead animals, lots of sewage. Remember, this had been a very busy city for a couple hundred years already at this point, and the raw sewage of New York City had gone right into the East River. So that's what they are digging through. And the worst part of it all is they are getting these cases of Caisson's disease, or the bends. And there's no exact count as to how many men we lost to Caisson's disease in the building of the bridge, but it's somewhere between 30 and 40 dead, countless others who are paralyzed, permanently injured, and in terrible shape. And unfortunately, because he was a great boss, Washington Roebling had not asked these men to do anything that he wouldn't do himself, so he was coming and going from the Caisson just as much as anyone else. And by 1872, he himself can barely move, he can barely speak, he can't have the lights on without them giving him a terrible headache. He is in rough shape from Caisson's disease, and he is still devoted to finishing this project. All right, let's take a little break from the Roeblings as we look at this incredible view. This is what it's all about, folks. This is what the Brooklyn Bridge does like no place else. Let's start with the Manhattan skyline here. There is our New York Tower. All right, those beautiful suspender cables, the American flag on top. A lot of times I'll come up here and things like the police will be practicing talking down jumpers from the tops of these towers. They get plenty of use out of them. But let's take a little swing over and I'll show you Midtown. You got your Empire State Building there. You have 432 Park, that gigantic, apparently horrifying apartment building to live in. And then you have two other bridges that cross the East River. We're looking north right now. And so that is Williamsburg Brooklyn. So the farthest bridge in the distance is the Williamsburg Bridge. Right in front of us. And we, of course, are on the Brooklyn. So that is Brooklyn across there. That's the Brooklyn Navy Yard. You've got a little neighborhood called Dumbo, just on the other side of the bridge, where we are going to end our tour. And then that is Brooklyn Bridge Park, all of that greenery you see just down below. That bridge that you see in the distance, that's the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which was built in the 1950s and is so long, it's about 4 miles long. That is designed so that it has to take into account the curvature of the earth. In the middle of the harbor there, you see Governor's Island, which is a private little island. They have festivals, parties, the Jazz Age lawn party, things like that. You have to take a ferry to get out there. Beyond that, we have the fifth borough, Staten Island. So what we're looking at right now on the far horizon, that is where the New York City Marathon starts. You take the Staten Island ferry out to Staten Island. You go through all 5 boroughs. The first leg of the marathon takes you across the Verrazano Narrows Bridge right there. All right, how long is the walk across? Let's see. In time, it's usually maybe 30 minutes. It is just over a mile from end to end, Lorraine. I've seen plenty of folks who think they can't make it. All of a sudden you get out here, you get inspired, and you can't stop. That is Lady Liberty right out there in the harbor, and she got here in 1886, so 3 years after the Brooklyn Bridge opens. The 1880s was a hoppin' time here in New York Harbor. There's a lot going on. Now I'm going to do one thing before we keep moving, and I finish my story about the Roeblings. There is a helicopter up there. One of my favorite things to do at this beautiful vantage point is to read some lines from Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman, of course, the great American poet, famously a Brooklynite, served as a nurse in the Civil War, and he wrote a beautiful poem called Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, which is about just the experience of timelessness when you're on the ferry in the middle of the East River between Brooklyn and Manhattan, and looking at this river and remembering this is the same river that the Lenape saw, that the Dutch saw, that the early English settlers saw. And it goes something like this. It avails not, time nor place. Distance avails not. I am with you, you men and women of a generation, or ever so many generations hence. Just as you feel when you look on the river and sky, so I felt. Just as any one of you is one of a living crowd, I was one of a crowd. Just as you are refreshed by the gladness of the river and the bright flow, I was refreshed. Just as you stand and lean on the rail, yet hurry with the swift current, I stood, yet was hurried. I too, many and many a time, crossed that river of old. Walt Whitman, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty good. All right, let's keep walking. I'm going to keep us moving. And this is normally the part of the tour where if you are in person, you are taking your favorite photo that you're going to share on Instagram or with your family. From this vantage point, some people like the Brooklyn Tower behind them, some people like the New York Tower behind them, some people like the harbor. It all works for me. So let's head. Would you recommend a ferry trip when I visit New York? I totally do. I think that there's so much to see from the water. It's easy to forget when you're in the midst of the city that we are a port, we have a gorgeous harbor, and so much of the city for so many years you could only see by boat. And so it is a unique vantage point, whether that's a Circle Line or even just one of the little ferries, the commuter ferries that you can take, the IKEA ferry, perchance, if you need to pick up some discount home goods. But there's all kinds of little boats that you can take that go around and give you such a unique view of the city that you can't really get any other way. All right, so let's talk the Roeblings. I kind of left you hanging there with Washington Roebling in really rough shape, still the chief engineer, but this incredibly devoted and hardworking son, what he does is right about where you see that welcome sign there. That's Brooklyn Heights. Washington Roebling buys himself an apartment with a window that faces the East River. He gets a good pair of field glasses or binoculars, and for the next 11 years, he is known to the crews working on the Brooklyn Bridge as the man in the window, because these immigrants who are coming in and risking their lives, all they know about their boss is that he is somewhere in a bedroom in Brooklyn Heights watching them through a pair of binoculars. Now, they don't know him, they don't see him, they don't meet him, because the person who is giving orders, the person who is showing up every day, the person who is having meetings with politicians, with the local newspapers, and keeping the entire project afloat, is, you guessed it, Emily Warren Roebling. Not a trained civil engineer, but an incredibly bright, strong, hardworking, and devoted young woman. She has a meeting with her husband, Washington, every morning, and he tells her what needs to happen on the bridge. She is the one who shows up. In an era where most women were not even allowed to go to college, much less, it's about 40 years before they are allowed to vote in elections, this woman shows up. She bosses around these tough guys. She goes toe-to-toe with corrupt politicians, and she gets the project done. Now, she doesn't do it easily. No, it's his wife, Kristen. His wife, Emily Warren. She has a lot to deal with, not the least of which is corrupt politicians. A guy named Boss Tweed, who I talked about a little bit yesterday. We saw the Tweed courthouse, this incredibly corrupt politician. He is on the Brooklyn Bridge Committee, and he hires a friend of his named J. Lloyd Hay to provide the cables that we are looking at here. And unfortunately, J. Lloyd Hay steals hundreds of thousands of dollars by making garbage cables for the Brooklyn Bridge, not worrying at all about putting people's lives at risk. You have these towers that are built up out of the ground once you have the bedrock. You have cables that are run across between the two towers, and then you have these suspension cables that you see. Also one of the innovations, not just for extra support, for this incredible aesthetic, the gracefulness of spider webs, and then the strength and fortitude of these incredible towers. Finally, after 11 years of toiling away, Emily on site, Washington in his bedroom. In 1883, the bridge is completed. It looks safe, but remember the track record for bridges. People are unsure, they are insecure about what it's going to look like, whether it's going to be able to support people. And so the first person who crosses is Emily Roebling in a horse-drawn carriage, and she does it in style. She carries on her lap a rooster, which she knew in ancient Greece was a sign of victory. And that is how she wanted to cross the bridge for the first time. This bridge that had killed her father-in-law, that had taken her husband's youth and vitality. She crossed it like a warrior returning from battle, because she had kind of done that. Now, that day was a gigantic party. Thousands of people came from all over the country. The governor was in town, he gave a speech. The president was in town to give a speech. And then after 7,000 invited guests crossed the bridge before the general public was allowed to, they made their way over to Washington Roebling's apartment in Brooklyn. And on the way, in the streets of Brooklyn, they were filled with American flags, with ribbons and bunting. All of the local businesses had gotten in on the act. Flower shops had made scale models of the bridge out of fresh flowers. Jewelry shops had made scale models of the bridge with gold chains as the suspension cables. There was one person arrested on the bridge that day for attempting to sell the Brooklyn Bridge. It's a true story. And when the sun went down that night, tons of fireworks went off. The city rejoiced, and they had achieved the eighth wonder of the world. 1 week later, there were 20,000 people crossing the bridge. It was very popular as a tourist attraction, as you can imagine, but people still had their doubts about how secure it was. And so as they're walking along, a woman trips and falls just on her own foot, and behind her, someone screams out, "The bridge is collapsing." And there is a stampede where thousands of people go rushing towards the staircases to get off the bridge, and 12 people are crushed to death. Terrible tragedy. Not a great omen for this new bridge that's just about to opening and needs a lot of business. To make their money back. Remember, it was a toll bridge, and they had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in getting it built. And so that is exactly how the saying started. Literally on the first day, there was somebody offering to sell it to a tourist and was arrested. So in New York, every by a triumph happens to be particularly fun. Less than a year after that stampede, which killed 12 people on the bridge, the huckster and master of BS, P.T. Barnum, makes an offer to the two cities. His confidence back. If you're 21 animals to go walking across in a parade led by Barnum himself. Now, thousands of people came out to watch that event, and it did the trick. They saw these elephants crossing completely confidently. There was a popular saying, it was understood as sort of folk wisdom, that elephants will not walk on anything that won't support their weight. And so watching those elephants, they realized that it was probably safe for them. Now, over the years, of course, the Brooklyn Bridge has entered the public imagination in a variety of different ways. Again, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, just like you said there, Lorraine, is popular. I learned it first on Bugs Bunny and Lad magazine, shows like that. But back in the day, there were all sorts of people trying to capitalize on the bridge. There was a guy named Daredevil signing autographs. He had a Broadway play written about him. He opened a bar in Brooklyn where he would tell people that story, and had a signed affidavit from the ferry captain saying that he had pulled him out of the water. There have been graffiti artists over the years that have tagged. My favorites. Thanks. In 16 in Brooklyn, and look. Sorry. Here. Up some signal. My apologies. Just enjoy the view there. And while we're at it, welcome to Brooklyn. Forget about it. As I was saying, one morning in 2015, we woke up, white flags on the bridge, and everybody, New Yorkers are pretty sensitive. But German who had climbed up those suspension cables in the middle of the night at about 4 o'clock in the morning and out the American flags for these white for anything. They weren't promoting any cause. All they wanted was to remind how gorgeous this bridge was, to not take it for granted, and to pay tribute to their countrymen. Remember, Roebling, he wasn't. We're big fans. So, they sent back the American flags, and all was well. My point is, to this day, every day, this bridge remains inspiring, and even more impressively, the civil engineers who take care of the bridge, they report that it requires less maintenance than all of the newer bridges because of how sturdy, how incredible the design is on it. Speaking of which, the Manhattan Bridge was built in 1909. The Williamsburg Bridge, 1903. They all sort of have the DNA of the Brooklyn Bridge inside them. And Roebling wire was still in business until the 1970s. So there is Roebling wire in the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, in the George Washington Bridge, in the Golden Gate Bridge. It was all used Roebling wire until finally they went out of business in the 1970s. But you can go to Roebling, New Jersey, which is right next to Trenton, and there is a museum that was made out of the old wire factory where that wire rope was first invented. All right. That was the story of the Brooklyn Bridge. Pretty inspiring. I hope you enjoyed it. There was a rumor for a little while there that there was going to be a film made of the Roebling family. They were talking about Daniel Radcliffe, you may know as Harry Potter, who's going to play Washington Roebling. Ben Kingsley was supposed to be good old Johann, and then Brie Larson, aka Captain Marvel, would have been the strong-jawed Emily Warren Roebling. But I guess it fell through and never really got off the ground. But if we got any screenwriters out there, it's waiting for you. Hi, Dustin. Oh, so glad to hear it. We just arrived in Brooklyn, and I'm going to show you where we are. We are 640 feet away from Dumbo, which stands for Down Under the Manhattan Bridge Overpass, Cadman Plaza. Coming up, just some sights here as we come off the Brooklyn Bridge and into Brooklyn. Now, as I mentioned, Brooklyn used to be its own city, but these days, if it were separated out from the rest of New York City, it would be the 4th largest city in the country. It's got 2.5 million people, so it's the largest of the 5 boroughs. The breakdown is basically 8.5 million people in the entire city, about 1.5 in Manhattan, 1.5, 2 in Queens, 2.5 in Brooklyn, another million in Staten Island. But Brooklyn is also the most fun. It's changed quite a bit over the years, of course. It used to be sort of thought of as this industrial kind of tough guy city, similar to Pittsburgh or Detroit or something like that. If you've ever seen the movie Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta, the whole premise of that movie is he has got to get out of Brooklyn or else his life is going nowhere. This is the little narrow staircase you can picture running away from a stampede down this stone. Our internet seems to be okay. Hello, nice to see you. And we are officially in Brooklyn. We made it. All right, so I got about 5 minutes left with you. If I can hang on to you for that long. We're just gonna take a walk down into Dumbo. I'll tell you a couple things about Brooklyn, and then we'll say adios for the day. But I hope you've been having as good a time on this tour as I have. It was really a pleasure. I hope the internet having a couple of hiccups wasn't too big of a deal, and that those views of the bridge and my ability to manipulate this technology at the same time as telling you about all our friends. Lorraine, thank you so much. Very kind of you. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Lorraine. And that is a great classic ice cream song. Some people call it Rocket Sauce. And one more little glance at the bridge. I can't resist. Gorgeous every single time. So we are now wandering down into Dumbo. So as I mentioned, Brooklyn Heights, which is just to the south of us right now, that was where Brooklyn started. And it was originally 5 different villages. Now, Dumbo is a much more recent appellation. It is along with the trend that you can start exponentially increasing the price of rent once you give a neighborhood a cute name. So this was not really known as anything except maybe Fulton Landing or the Piers for the years when this was an industrial center. So in the 19th century, no actual relation to the elephant, but people use that a lot. There's a lot of branding. Atlantic and Pacific, which you may know as the A&P, the first national supermarket chain, that started down here in Dumbo. The first coffee roasters in the country, the Arbuckle Brothers Roasting Company, that was, oh, thanks, Michaela, thank you, I appreciate it. That was in this neighborhood too. So you can see all of these old industrial buildings. This is where the water meter was invented. Thompson Water Meter Company. Beautiful old strong structures made out of bricks that were all abandoned in the mid-20th century as soon as offshoring happened and people started moving their factories out of the city, and the piers were not quite as busy. You may recognize this gorgeous shot from a million photographs that you've seen, or for any cinephiles, from the poster for Once Upon a Time in America, the Sergio Leone movie, this view of the Manhattan Bridge from down here by the piers. Other film fans, if you've ever seen Scent of a Woman, there's a scene where Al Pacino drives a Ferrari around an old abandoned neighborhood. That was this in the 1970s. This place emptied out from the 60s to the 80s, and it was best known to New Yorkers as a place you did not want to go unless you wanted to get tetanus down on the piers. You had to avoid the packs of wild dogs that ran around Dumbo. The mafia was a big fan of this place because it was a quiet area next to the river where you could dispose of things like bodies or firearms, anything you needed no one to pay attention to. You come down to this neighborhood and you get rid of it. And then all of a sudden, guess what happened? You know the whole trend. You got an industrial area, you got big buildings with lots of light for cheap rent. Artists started moving in, and they said, I don't mind a wild dog or a mafia don now and then. I just need a place where I can play my noise music or make my cool paintings. And so by the 70s and early 80s, you can, Kristen, let me, it's just a lighting question right here. Let me get that great view of the Empire State Building through the arch of the Manhattan Bridge there, and that'll be our sort of closing shot on this tour. And so there was one family of real estate developers, the Walentises, Jane and David Walentis, that had seen that same trend to happen to neighborhoods like Soho, right? Industrial neighborhood, empties out, artists move in, give it a cute name. All of a sudden you're charging $1 million an apartment. And thank you, Diana, very kind of you. Really, really appreciate it. And let's see if we can get a nice view. Just sort of vaguely see in the middle of the Manhattan Bridge there. There it is. You can see the Empire State Building perfectly framed by that neo-Gothic arch of the Manhattan Bridge. Very good. And so by the 80s, Jane and David Walentis had bought 5 buildings here. They spent just a couple of $1 million. Nothing, because this was not a desirable neighborhood. And they sort of spent up the gentrification process. They started inviting in boutique coffee shops and cool bookstores and art galleries, and next thing you know, you have $25 million lofts in this neighborhood and companies like West Elm moving in and selling their very expensive home furnishings. But still some cool, amazing views of the river. Brooklyn Bridge Park has just been opening up piece by piece in the last 8 years, and is now 1.5 miles of new, gorgeous park in what was once those rusted out old shipping piers along the East River here. And hopefully Brooklyn feels as relaxed to you as it does to me. There's a little noise from the train, but it's always a fun shift change or change in energy when you go from busy, crazy, rushing around touristy Manhattan to Brooklyn, which is always a couple notches slower. The air is still just a little bit cleaner, just like it was back in the days when this was Lenape-Hoking and that was Manhattan, when that was New Amsterdam and this was Brooklyn. And thanks to the Brooklyn Bridge, now we can enjoy both within about an hour. Hey, that's my face. Here we are. All right. Beautiful. Well, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Diana. Everybody else who joined me for this tour, Dustin and your class, PDX represent. Sarah, if you're still on in Montana. It was a genuine pleasure to get to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge with you. I hope technically and visually it was even a fraction of as stunning for you folks at home as it was for me on the actual bridge. We're working on it. We're iterating. We'll get better and better, make these tours smoother and more fun. But for today, thank you. It was a genuine pleasure. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. And I can't wait to see you tomorrow. This weekend, I'll be doing 2 more tours while I'm in New York City, especially now that I'm warmed up and I know how this little pistol works. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. in New York, I'm going to take everyone on a women's history tour of New York City. So that is going to be through mostly downtown, talking a lot about labor rights activists, women's rights activists, artists, and the first female cabinet member, the first American Catholic saint, all these interesting New Yorkers who don't get talked about enough, for my money. And then on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to take you to one of my favorite weird little sort of deep cuts in New York, which is Roosevelt Island, which has had a lot of different names over the years. Welfare Island, Blackwell's Island, Farkhan's Island, which means Hog Island, and it's this weird little 1.5 mile long sliver in the middle of the, thank you, Kristen, very kind of you, I appreciate that, in the middle of the East River, which we take a special tramway hanging above the East River to get to. Some more gorgeous views. Hopefully the weather will hold out. Some great stories, and I can't wait to see you all. It was a pleasure. Thank you again. And have a beautiful, beautiful day wherever you are. Cheers.